The wound is the place where the light enters you. Have you heard this phrase before? It's an oft-cited proverb from the mystic Rumi. The full quote is a back-and-forth conversation with a seeker of spiritual wisdom. I said, "What about my eyes?" They said, "Keep them on the road." I said, "What about my passion?" They said, "Keep it burning." I said, "What about my heart?" They said, "Tell me what you hold inside it." I said, "Pain and sorrow." They said, "Stay with it. The wound is the place where the light enters you." Now I've updated the pronouns from he to they, but this is the conversation. Ever have a wound you just keep picking at? Or maybe involuntarily, it keeps breaking open. The sutures aren't quite fixed right, or they dissolve too soon. You have these dissolvable stitches. It could hurt and get infected. Bacteria gets in there. It could scar you. I have a scar right over my heart. It's a keloid scar, and it formed after I got a cancerous mole removed. Wounds are part of living. That doesn't mean I think we should go out provoking people to pick at our scabs and give us new wounds, but often that's what we do. We seek out these same sources that have been hurtful to us. For trauma survivors, it's because they embody thrill-seeking behaviors. All they know is action. I'm depersonalizing, but I'm talking about myself too. So it's something that I also deal with, no judgment. Chiron is the archetype of the wounded healer within us all. Once we've had something hurt us, we can have many reactions, but the hope of the Chiron influence is that once you're wounded and you heal, you do always remember the scar, but you use the memory of this wound not for wallowing in sadness, but to become a warrior for justice. That doesn't mean you have to become a violent warrior. And that doesn't mean that you become the abuser. There are warriors for peace. But what warriors have in common is they have deep convictions. Think of the word convicted. You'd think of it in conversations about prison sentences, for instance. I know I would, although I'm on the spectrum of abolitionist. So people who are convicted, let's say, they wear the label of whatever they've done. Convicted of something. Just like we'd say, convicted in something. People believe you've committed an act and you've followed through on it. That's what it means to be convicted. Now you're doing the time to pay for this act. Obviously, if you've listened to my other podcasts in this series, you'd understand that I'm not a utopianist when it comes to the prison system and this whole narrative. In fact, I think prison is largely a failure. But follow my analogy. A conviction is a powerful inner principle. It makes you strong-standing and firm. Hurts can be inexcusable, but they're also unavoidable. And if we're not learning from them, where does that put us? There's a new meme circulating about trauma. It says, some people's entire identity is centered around trauma, and they don't know who they are without it. And what was the central thesis or theme of this podcast right from the start? It was that. It was exactly that, right? How will we know who we are without trauma? So we've gone through all of the planets and we've learned our personality styles, or we've thought about maybe looking into them and learning more about ourselves, seeing that we're all unique. But what have you heard me repeat since the first episode in talking about healing? We are not our trauma. That is something that happened to us, that maybe shaped us. But we have to decide that what happened to us was not for nothing. You can tell I'm from New Jersey, not for nothing. But maybe it's up to us to decide what all of this means to us. to take our agency back. This is Merle Bardenoir with Pour Endormir les Démons. Maybe you remember a few episodes back, I talked with you about my issues with severe anxiety surrounding public speaking after years of being adept at it. When I was getting the crippling anxiety, what I was telling myself was, if you make a mistake, you're not okay. You will not be okay, you will not recover from this, because you're only worth how you appear to others. You have nothing on the inside, you're only how people see you. Obviously, at the time, I didn't understand that's what it was that was manifesting as the severe anxiety, but when I went inside myself to figure this out, I had to look and see how I was still ripping open my old wounds. My old wounds that told me, you're too weird, you're not accepted by anybody, and all we have is how people see us. And that's the only value that you have. You don't have I didn't grow up with much security, so that's how I was conditioned to think, but in a covert type of way. I was conditioned to think the only value you can receive is how other people perceive you. And that has to do with my own Chiron issues. And I'll talk about that later in the episode. But I refuse to see myself like that anymore, and it's been so healing for me. I'm still working through it, obviously. And learning my shadow is just half of the battle, right? You also may remember me mentioning how much I love the contemporary philosophy of Adrienne Mary Brown. Well, since today is the new year, Happy New Year, everyone. She came out with her mantra on Instagram, so feel free to look her up on there and bookmark her because she is great. And some of her ideas are worth noting, especially for this episode. And so here she writes in the style of a poem, and I'm just going to read what she wrote. I am no victim of life. I shape change. We are not victims of circumstance. We shape change. I practice what I want to become. We practice what we want to create. I am a microcosm of all the possible justice, liberation, pleasure, and honesty in the universe, and I act accordingly. I remember that I exist only in relation to other people. I accept that I cannot change others, but I can hold standards in my own life. I willingly engage in support and transformative justice processes for accountability. I create more possibilities in the face of scarcity thinking. I act from and towards love. So there are a few phrases I think we should revisit there. One is, what is scarcity thinking? Many listeners will know what this is, and I briefly mentioned it before. While growing up in a single-parent house where my mom was cash poor, and I was raised with help from family members, I always believed there wasn't enough for me. And I was always confirming what I thought I knew for sure, and what is enforced by this capitalist society, which is there's not enough and I'm not enough. I need things and I don't have enough of those. I need money, I don't have enough of those. I must not be enough because I can't get what I need. So the thinking reinforces I need to be more to get more. And that's wrong thinking. But the thinking is I'm not worthy of anything of value. And at a deep level even, I'm not valuable. So in this way, and because of other circumstances in my life, I started to see myself as a victim of life, which is understandable. And they do say that too, if you've been a victim of sexual violence, it's easy for you to maintain that victim consciousness because you feel as though that's what you'll always be, because that's what you replay in your head all the time. I would also react in anger toward people who didn't realize that we're all just victims of life and our sociology. And there's a small percentage of me who still recognizes this and believes it and understands it, definitely. And I'm not completely throwing that out. I think life is a combination of everything, of all thoughts and philosophies. So I'm not throwing any one philosophy out, but I'm just saying that if you are thinking that everyone is just a victim of life and sociology, it can get depressing. It's existentially deadening. And you can see why people fight for justice. But what if we weren't just victims of life and our sociology? And that's what Brown is asking us to consider and to have conviction about. What if we can be active in creating the world? What if the world is not being created by outside actors, but by us all along? What if we have a part in that world? Even if in what we can do for others, we're creators. What if we could make ourselves so sturdy in what we believe about ourselves that it would help liberate others? And that's what I think she's talking about. I remember that I exist only in relation to other people. You can't hold others, but you hold standards for yourself. What if the money we had from being so secure in what we can do could help us circulate it to others? That's just a very pragmatic example, thinking about our society and how it functions and not trying to punish people for earning money, but asking how can they help others. And I think a lot of, especially actresses, are stepping up. Actresses and women in the public eye are stepping up and asking this question of themselves too, because it's not enough to just wear, if you're a multimillionaire, it's not enough to just wear a t-shirt in public saying me too, but maybe you want to donate a big chunk of your money to women's shelters or Planned Parenthood, do something for people because you have so much. I'm watching one of my favorite shows the other night, Empire, and on Empire, there's a scene where they visit, Philadelphia neighborhood where all the kids are talking to them about the realities of their lives, the main characters who grew up millionaires and who are still millionaires. And then they break into this happy feel-good segment of, we're all singing songs together and, and then the kids disperse and it's just, it's play acting. But I'm thinking in the real world, if these were real people, I would wonder why they wouldn't make it so there weren't any homeless kids. Donate some of their money or volunteer some of their time to help these people. And I understand not everyone wants to be saved. And I'm not trying to promote this savior consciousness, as some people would criticize me for. But I'll go back to that, is if you can support yourself, then why not help? But let's go back to the scarcity consciousness, which is assuming, no, you can't help yourself yet. And so therefore, you can't help anyone else. But the day will come when you will be able to help yourself. And in many ways, you are helping yourself all the time. Just maybe you're not a multimillionaire and you can't give back the way that, it's not a utopian thing. But let's think about this more. I used to be part of a bartering community. And one of the things the founder and I would discuss is the history of bartering. And if you'd like to know more about this, check out Debt, the First 5,000 Years. It's a really big book, but in the first few chapters, you can read all about the fact that before bartering, people just gave each other stuff. They just gave each other stuff. They would come to a central location, they would have all their stuff, they would put it there, and it was as simple as somebody saying, hey, I made too much, so if you need some, take some. Oh, I knitted too many scarves because it's fun, and I have, a lot of yarn because, I don't know, I get it from my uncle. So I knitted too many scarves. You need one? Here you go. It's yours. Oh, I grew too many potatoes. You need potatoes? Here you go. You have some. Now that's something that some of us could never even fathom in this society because there's always some exchange value involved. But that's not how society always was. So let's think about worlding again. The idea that we're agents of change and we can think about different worlds besides this one. Because we've studied this one and we see what doesn't work. This is Madame Rrose Selavy with Despacho. This last song, because of the title, has me thinking of Despacho ceremonies. Have you heard of them? It's generally a Peruvian or shamanic tradition, and it's believed when you do this ceremony, you journey to the soul of the world. It's an empowerment ceremony. And usually you're making offerings, and I don't know, I'm not a shaman, and I'm not Peruvian, so I don't know all the specifics of the ceremony, but the offerings that you're giving up and the mantras that you are repeating, and it basically resembles spell casting. And I mean that in a positive way, if I have to clarify. But the belief is that during the ceremony, we're connected and aligned with Earth and identify what we want in our lives and community and what we want everything to be about. So it's an affirming ceremony where things feel connected, where we feel connected to where we stand. And we communicate that to the cosmos. And we align with our purpose. And that's why they're known as empowerments, despachos, because they awaken and empower our full potential. It's hard to admit, but sometimes we get used to letting people hurt us and don't realize that we may even seek that, even though that's what's making us sit in our own mess. One of the things I've learned in my life through analyzing myself through the lens of people who've studied the patterns we fall into when looking to create what's happened to us unconsciously, right? We talked about in other episodes of this podcast, the compulsion to repeat. It's comfortable to take risks you know won't turn out because you get used to the pain. You get used to the pain of, I don't want to call it failure, but of collapse. You get used to that, and it becomes easier to be around people who don't care about you because you're used to trying to make people care who never will. But you know what I decided after a while? Those people are not in my world anymore. They don't have a place in my world. And I'm starting to learn the block button, the mute button, how to let people out of my life. I don't need to shove them most of the time. You just open the door so that they can leave. And sometimes, blocking, muting, those things help because, you don't have to see them for a while. And if they want to really be in your life, they can contact you in a meaningful way. I actually read a post by a person who says she no longer accepts apologies, like written apologies or spoken apologies. She says she only takes money as an apology because she thinks of her time as valuable. So that's very literal and may not be for everyone, but I thought it was funny and kind of inspirational. Okay, you want to make reparations, right? So that's how a lot of people who descended from American slavery feel. Okay, you really want to make this right? Well, yeah, we can say, let's not be racist and all this stuff, but guess what? All this trauma over the generations has taken a toll on what I can and cannot achieve. So, you want to make amends? You can give me money for it. And obviously that has never come to pass. There have never been reparations. So I think what this person is doing is pretty ingenious. She's saying, you know what? You wasted my time because you hurt me. And if you really want to make it right, show me. Give me some of your money. So, you could read into that in other ways, I'm sure, but I'm not going to hate on her for it because I understand. I used to think that I needed to let everyone's little thoughts into my space 24/7 because I thought it makes you stronger if you can take time for the pettiness of others. That sounds so stupid when I say it out loud, but I used to think that I had time for those sub-tweets and, sub-grams. And what I realized is that opening old wounds over and over again just because being in a panic attack is familiar to me is not the way to live my life. No, because that pettiness doesn't just stay on the page in a text on a computer, it weakens your immune system. And also, we have to look at ourselves, and me too, and say, am I creating this for other people? Am I the one who's putting that stuff out there? Am I engaging in this silly back and forth about things that don't really matter? What does matter to me? How am I going to uplift myself? How am I going to uplift myself without harming others? And all of this weakens your immune system. And that makes your life shorter. There's a quote I used to like, time spent wasted online cannot be returned to you by tiny little benevolent internet elves. I think we've done a lot online and things can still be done online. But I think there's some stuff to think about for all of us who need to come back to our center. I want to have conversations with people who care whether or not I wake up in the morning every day. And I'm lucky to have quite a few people in my life who do care. They know who I am. They know the story of my life and I know theirs. And we care about healing together. I do what I do for them. And the people who don't want to be in my life, they can go. But I didn't always feel like that. This is Mercury and the Architects with The Wolf.
I spend my weekends pulling bullets out my back. The ones I believed in are the ones who lead the trap. I let my guard down, jumped in the wrong crowd. There are wolves out there in the fog. Look me in both eyes, no one's a good guy. There are wolves among the dogs. reflection in the moon. Not the only fucking crook who try to take my life too soon. Sucks for you that I pulled through. Not as dead as you last saw me. Here we are, just me and you. You're gonna wish you never crossed me. Look me in both eyes, no one's a good guy. There are wolves among the dogs. I'll let my guard down, jump to the wrong crowd. There are wolves out there. Look me in both eyes, no one's a good guy. There are wolves among the dogs. I'll let my guard down, jump to the wrong crowd. There are wolves out there in the fog. Look me in both eyes, no one's a good guy. There are wolves inside his mind.
So, what about Chiron? I've been talking about Chiron in a roundabout way, but let's get more specific, you say. Well, I prefer not to, as the saying goes. With Chiron in my 4th house, communication has always been an issue for me because I've had to build defenses up since my early life. So sometimes I can be very interior, and as a result, with things like this podcast, I can try to be so precise that it might even alienate people, but I've learned to deal with things that way. So for me to be roundabout is a little difficult, but that's what I decided to do with this episode, and hopefully you can piece together how it all relates to Chiron. Really, my wounding, in part, comes from never feeling at home. And I won't get into the complete details of that, but it also comes from not being able to communicate my position. So, though I'd say most people would probably see me as outgoing, although, like a little introverted, but also like an introverted extrovert, I describe myself as maybe being standoffish for most of my life. And some close to me, or those who read my earlier out-of-circulation poetry, know that I had problems communicating with my father, who was in and out of my life. And when he was there, did quite a bit of wounding of me himself. So Chiron and Gemini, which is what I have in my chart, I always take my time with my thoughts and words because I want to be certain that I express myself correctly. And sometimes that results in me staying up in my head and not speaking, so it's actually easier for me to plan things, and I think it goes better, mostly. But that's part of my wounding and how I've learned how to deal with it. And so I'm trying to allow myself to be open to some improvisation where it is warranted. And another thing, though, to kind of change course is maybe your Chiron placement has made you extra empathetic or extra mothering towards others. But maybe you don't quite know how to mother yourself. And also, Chiron has to do with the ancestral legacy and secretive nature of families. So for me, a piece of my family history has been secretive, because when they came to America, they wanted to hide. And the way they did that was by forgetting their old identities and only practicing their former identities in secret. And so carrying secrets is heavy, and it makes you act a certain way based on you feeling like you can't be your authentic self, like you have to be hidden. So sometimes taking on a new identity can be liberating, but I'd argue, there's both sides there. It can be liberating but also scary. And I think my ancestors just dealt with it the way that they dealt with it. And we can't redo that now, but confronting my own shadow had to do with coming to terms with my ancestral baggage of coming to a place completely new in order to escape death, basically, in order to survive. And once I faced that about that one portion of my family, it's funny how things lighten up a bit. Like I feel like I know more about my own purpose, and I understand why parts of my family split up and went different ways or had trouble dealing with certain things. It just lightens things. And then it's less likely that when some of the things that I've learned to use to cope with life spring up and I'm able to look at them now and see them for what they are, now those old wounds won't open up again and feel hurt because I've learned how to deal with that shadow. So this is what I want to leave you with in the new year's, listeners. You have to find where your wounding is, and it could be in multiple places. For instance, maybe your family was great, but you were bullied. And this makes you distrustful of people around you. I've definitely had my share of bullying. This was like stop bullying campaign type of stuff, right? So one vivid memory I have of bullying, because a lot of people go through it. And I don't know, maybe some listeners actually were bullies listening. I don't know. But, one of the situations where I was bullied is I was in early grade school, and I always used to take the bus home with my cousins, and my mom was usually out working when I would get home from school. So my grandfather would pick me up from my cousin's house, and I had three boy cousins, and I would walk home with them most of the time. But sometimes they weren't there, or they didn't take the bus, and so there was this bully on the bus. And we lived next to each other in the housing project, and it was snowy and nobody was around. My cousins weren't there, and my grandfather wasn't around, no aunts or uncles. And this kid, he grabbed me by my neck and he shoved my head in the snow. And I was at the point where I felt like I couldn't breathe, and he kept holding me down. And luckily my grandfather pulled up and my cousins were in the car, and he yelled at the kid and chased him away. He did his get going. That's what he used to say. So how can I reflect on that now? Obviously the psychoanalyst in me, well, this kid obviously had some abuse in the house, maybe domestic violence between his parents, or, his parents were abusing him and he was taking it out on someone. But look at that situation and how easy as a listener it probably is for you to diagnose this kid. But then look at your life and the people who hurt you. Are you seeing those situations clearly? The people who wound you, do you keep them around, or does your inner grandpa come out and stand up to them and tell them to get going? So that's why I bring up this bullying story. What are you doing to protect yourself? Obviously, this allegory is interesting. We could go into the socioeconomic factors, right, that made that bullying possible, but I won't go into that in this podcast. So what do you do to protect yourself? You're not a helpless child anymore, so you're going to have to protect yourself on your own, or Friends and family can obviously come to your aid, your community can come to your aid, but how are you creating that world? What are you doing to help yourself? So Chiron is said to bring information that is more spiritual. And that's another thing that sometimes people have a problem with, right? So just as I backtracked on that story and said we could look at the socioeconomic factors of the story and how it was possible, and obviously gender angles and all of that, to take the spiritual view, it's less understandable by human ears. But it's understandable through pain. Pain is a Saturnian thing. The karmic taskmaster, right? That punishes you. And where the otherworldly comes in is Chiron sits between Uranus and Saturn. So Uranus is all these kind of otherworldly ideas, and Saturn is the discipline, the pain. That's where Chiron's sitting, in between those two things. And just remember, Chiron represents your deepest wound, but if you learn to conquer it within yourself, you can then help others effectively. And forget that for now, let's curb that, but help yourself effectively heal from wounds. And you can help others, when you get there, heal from wounds that are similar in nature. And stop sabotaging yourself. And the best healers, therapists, astrologers, Reiki people, tarot readers, blah, 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 they know how to eradicate people's pain or help them find the place where they eradicate people's pain. They say the therapist doesn't eliminate your pain, but helps you find the pain within yourself so that you can deal with it. So dealing with Chiron, it takes a lot of grit. And you have to use a lot of self-inquiry. But take a look at your birth chart. Where is Chiron? What does it mean for you? What does it mean on your journey? There's that harmful saying that circulates, it goes along the lines of she was asking for it. Why didn't she protect herself in regards to situations like rape? And now we're not here to shame people for not being able to protect themselves. We're never here to do that. Because it's been proven in situations like that, you shut down. And you may even, depending on when this happened to you and if you've dealt with it or not, but you might still be shutting down when you come across situations that trigger you or remind you of what you initially went through. And it can actually put you in more traumatic situations over time. You don't believe me? You can look it up. Do your own research. That's always pragmatic. And Chiron's also associated with the emotional wounds that we receive early in our lives. So the sign Chiron will dominate, but the house placement will show you which area of your personality is motivated, by the wounding and where you'll put your efforts based on that. So are you looking at your wound as a site of healing and potential to grow strong? Or are you being unconscious and leaving yourself open to attack?
I made you coffee. That ought to help cope with the injustice of the world a little.